Over the last 10 episodes of In the Trenches, we've had some of the best GTM operators strip down what actually happens when you're building a function from scratch. This week, we're pulling together some of the best moments from the recordings. Let's get into it.
Are we rolling? Sweet. Now my day starts.
The main point that allowed us to understand what was our ICP came also from the nature of the product itself. If you think about NA10 and the self-hostability, you can imagine that it would be a regulated industry, and within the regulated industry, maybe, or even in a non-regulated industry, who would use a self-hostable product? It would be high sensitive data that are managed by a specific team. In our case, it would be more security, IT people, because the problem that NA10 is solving is repetitive manual tasks, right? So the more you are doing a manual task, the more NA10 makes sense from an ROI perspective, because it's cutting basically time to market.
How did you guys decide what your entry point and your wedges?
You don't really decide yourself, right? At the start, when you have a few inbound leads, you focus on what you have. And so it's the discovery of that specific clients. And then, of course, there are discussions that you can do with whoever, with advisors, with the employees, with whoever you want. But then it's something that you discovered through the early discussions. And that's why to all the startups that are coming to me, they are like two people in the company and they have maybe a cool product. But even if you have a cool product, you do not know really who's your ICP yet until you really have an exponential growth or clear data that are demonstrating that you cracked that specific segment. And even today, if you're asking me who's the ICP of NA10, there is for sure an ICP, but there is also a bigger bubble within, let's say, the ICP segment. There is even bigger, and NA10 is really a generic tool, so it can be sales, can marketing, IT, or whatever.
Right. Talking about the inbound portion, this is a really important topic for reps. How do you decide what deals to pursue and which ones to ignore?
When you are scarce in resources, and in this time, the most scarce resource that you have is time, you need to prioritize.
Yeah.
For me, I would not disqualify by default some deals that are maybe small and are coming inbound or whatever, even at the start. If you're launching a product and it works, right? But then you need to prioritize it at a certain point, and you need to balance the time, the effort that you're putting into a deal, and what will be coming in terms of revenues. For sure, one of the main KPIs that you will be using, it's stupid to say, is really revenues. No, revenue is a very good, let's say, signal, but I would say that an effort is required on every type of client, right? So meaning that no client needs to be left in the end.
First thing I tried to do, which actually failed, is push the product straight. When I would call someone up and get them on the phone and ask them if they were looking into new finance systems. And because it's such a painful thing to do, change finance systems, everyone would immediately say, no, we're not interested. The shift which worked for me is introduce more curiosity rather than pushing the product itself. So what really worked in around the 4th or 5th month of building outbound was ask the question, are you interested in AI in the finance function? And most of the time they'd say yes, because even if they're not looking at changing a system, they're looking at automating one thing, or perhaps they had an investor meeting and the board says, you guys must use AI all over the business. Sales is using it, marketing's using it, engineering's using it. Why aren't you using it? So when someone cold calls them and says, we built this AI thing, at least don't you want to take a look? It resonates a bit better. So I think rather than pushing the product straight away, just inspiring curiosity by asking a question that we think they will say yes to.
I heard John on a podcast recently with Manny from Paid say that when CFOs join new companies or these VPs, they switch roles, they want to make a mark on that company. What were some of the common signals that still remain or maybe have evolved that help actually generate pipeline?
That's definitely a huge one. New in role or promotion or joining a new company is probably the biggest source of pipeline. I don't think that's specific to finance. Just executives in general want to make a splash in their first 90 days on the role, and efficiencies, introducing AI, building something that they can put their name to is part of it. And especially within our ICP, we're selling to fast growing companies where something or the other is always on fire. And usually when they hire a head of finance or a CFO to come in, they're coming in to put out that fire. And we can go to them and say, here is something that can help you solve this problem that you were hired to solve. Then it becomes a no-brainer.
How do you find out what specific fire that is? Are you seeing like a pattern where it's like, hey, okay, companies that, bridge into the UK market talk about, I don't know, let's say in your case, consolidation, or reporting. Is there a specific sort of like fire that you guys start seeing is common across certain companies at growth stages, or not necessarily?
Yeah. Any tech company that's scaling very quickly will most certainly go through these problems. They're not going to be visible or public, or no one's going to
Yeah,
post
exactly.
in for that matter. If you see they're expanding, if you see they're hiring like crazy, if you see their revenue's gone up, if they're raising a new round, there's almost always going to be a issue in finance which they need to solve, which we could come in and offer the solution for.
What are some of the real bottlenecks that you feel nobody really talks about when you're selling these large deals?
So I had to learn this on the fly. I found out the hard way, I think. And that is, if you look at an enterprise brand, right? So we can take, let me anonymize them a little bit. We can take one of the streamers. Let's say one of the larger streamers globally. There's only a few of them, right? Those are organizations with some of them quite a bit of legacy, also from just what other lines of business that they have supported, whether it is more linear, for example, or just own content that they produce. Yeah. These are large organizations with a lot of people who need to all sort of look in the same direction and then start rowing in order for your project to take off. So the biggest thing for me was mostly make that initial diagnosis, that scan of, okay, you have one person who is excited about what you're offering, about what the solution that you're pushing forward. That doesn't mean anything yet, right? Because all of a sudden you have, several different continents. There's maybe 3, 4, 5 different teams that need to look at it from either a digital marketing perspective, CRM retention. There might be a media angle to it. There's a tech team that has an opinion, and you just haven't met those people yet. So my suggestion would be, or what I found out the hard way, is just be extremely paranoid about who you don't know yet. Try to map out. It could just be with sticky notes, right? Like, this is the team that I know. They get a thumbs up, thumbs down. You get some sort of sentiment. They need to move on to the next team. And the teams that you don't know, you need to somehow, through your relation building skills, need to get an intro to them, right? Whether that is like a warm internal intro or what we tried before. Yeah. Also with Meta, right? There might be other platform partners who have a lot more insight about this brand, what are current priorities. Another one is agencies, of course, are fairly often involved with these projects. And all of these stakeholders, if you give them a little bit of either inside information, something to make them look good, a specific piece of business insight that they can use in their next call, they're usually fairly happy to help you to paint this whole picture, basically, of who you're dealing with and who do you all need from a, let's say, who needs to say yes, who needs to unlock a budget for you, who needs to, use some of their political capital internally to move things around on a roadmap. I think that's my biggest takeaway from the last couple of years supporting these larger.
But that's highly nuanced, right? Because then you're working with Meta as a partner, you're working with agencies. Like, how do you make sure everyone's on the same page?
You don't. As in, at first you don't. So it's a lot of like one-to-one bridges that you need to build. Later on in that process, like the fun thing for us at least was, like, for example, messaging as a media format, that was a first, right? So that sort of, there's nobody writing an RFP to us saying, hey, we want this project, right? So it's a lot of educate and inform. But all of a sudden you can put on a hat where you are in a thread, maybe with more than 20 people, right? Across the geographies, Meta's in there, the agencies are in there, and there's nobody who has a better idea to go from A to B than me in that case, right? Like in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed is king. So if I can just come with a strong point of view of, hey, this is how we've done it before, essentially done it before, this is all that we need, this is what we would like to take a look at in order to make a sort of, informed decision on how to make forward. And this is the payoff. That sort of gives you a position inside of that thread where you can give everybody in the process of standing the project up what you need from them, what's in it for them, and in the meantime try to make them look good, right? Throw a couple compliments in there about their work in the past or how they contribute to that I think has worked.
You said something just now as well that I feel like a lot of reps may have gotten wrong. When is it too soon to ask for that intro? Like, how do you, because obviously it's very hard to quantify like the level of relationship. Me and you as people on the front line, I think we have a good idea on that. But like for someone that hasn't done that yet, how do you know when you're jumping the gun versus like, hey, okay, I've got them in my pocket. Let's use that to force multiply.
Yeah, getcha. So that sort of goes back to like, what is your multi-threading strategy, which I think is more of a common like suggestion for some. And that could then backfire, of course, as with all things. My biggest thing, oddly enough, it's not super scientific, is trust your gut a little bit. Like you deal with people all day, right? In most commercial roles, right? And most calls, you try to get a specific point across. You want to get something out of the call, and in return, you need to build trust with this person. They need to give them to make them look good internally, for example, to their bosses. Of hey, I'm pushing this project forward. So trust your instinct a little bit on when to ask for what, and soften them a little bit. Right? It's not a. I'm not telling you or would tell anybody of saying, hey, I won't do any more work if you get me an audience with your boss, for example. That might not happen, right? That's just might not be the right way to go about it. But as soon as you have sort of like a thesis of, hey, I think we should loop in this other team or this other person, and this is why, and this could be just give them a heads up of what's coming within the project. 2, if it is something you want them to review, or is it 3 that you need sort of like a joint decision between these teams? And within a sales process, you can try to get ahead of, as you get to the latter stages, right? So you provided a demo, did the proposal, and at the end, you need to talk to the tech team. Try to pull that intro forward, right? Just say from my own experience, what is it? At some point, we'll get the tech team involved. Who is it? I did my research. I think it is this name. This is kind of what I would like to share with them. Would that be okay? It's something that you could ask your champion, for example, because they are sort of aligned with your success of the project. They sell when you are not in the room, and they might be able to a little bit of feedback as well of, hey, I think this is the right time to do it.
Talking about partnerships, I mean, you were part of the early days with developing that out from an alliance perspective with 2 very successful companies that I'd say pretty much cracked the code in some ways. Maybe a good place to start is like talking in the context of both the softwares that you were representing, right? Like enterprise heavy. Is there a signal that says, hey, it's the right time to start looking at partners?
If you can't sell your product yourself, how can you expect someone else to sell it? Simple, right? Some spaces lean more nicely to partners than others. And I will give examples. So I would say that, like, once you have, I would say, your product market fit, once you have that, what described as that kind of measurable performance improvement, and I guess, measurable performance, I would always start to look at, right, who sits in my adjacent ecosystem? So I mentioned the CFO's office, or let's say at Pigment, let's say I've got a planning solution, but maybe, we sit really nicely next to month close solutions. We sit nicely next to treasury solutions. We sit next to on top of the ERP. We sit with the technology ecosystem around us is really nicely complementary. We're sharing a very similar ICP. So there's quite a nice opportunity to bring some mutual business, right? But depending on the partner motion, I would always say you have to have a direct sales channel. If you're looking at this kind of referral or co-sell business, especially with technology partners, you want to be able to have a 2-way motion, because otherwise nobody wants to just have a feeder on their books. And I'll talk to that. In the case of Celonis, we're selling to these large enterprises. And I would ask the question, and I guess this is one of the foundational ones, go back to the beginning for whether I should partner, is that how do my buyers buy? How do they buy? And what are they buying? And what are their problem statements? And take the example, I'm a CFO, let's say Siemens, massive conglomerate. I don't care. A Celonis, a ServiceNow, a Salesforce individual vendor, I've got foundational problems or challenges, profitability, cash flow optimization, working capital optimization. I've got foundational kind of challenges as a CFO. And I like to know, the role of people, process, technology. How do the vendors roll up into helping me address these big ticket items like profitability? Now, who do I turn to when I want to talk about or spar or soundboard this challenge I have with the profitability in my business? Look, there's no single vendor I turn to. I'll turn to my trusted advisor. Maybe it's McKinsey or an MBB. Maybe it's the Big Four. Maybe it's Accenture. Maybe it's one of these guys who can help and talk to my business right across. They've got the domain expertise. They know my business intimately. They understand the technology landscape. They understand my systems and processes. They can really talk to me and start to think, okay, well, what are you trying to do? And often what we saw is there was the seed of the finance transformation. That's what we would see. And we're like, all right, okay. And what happens is I was like, well, how can we make it that we are like the number one tool in their toolbox so that when they're having these conversations with CFOs, that we're part of that narrative, we're part of the fix, we're part of the future, part of the transformation.
Yeah.
Because if we're not partnered with them, we're not part of the conversation. And the hardest bit for us was getting a seat at the table when we're talking these large, giant enterprises. So for us, that started really early, and it was a nice compliment because in and around an implementation, it's not just technology implementation, it's all the advisory and enablement and services that goes around it. And it's a kind of longer term engagement, especially as large enterprises. So for us, like that, we could have engaged with that really early, and we did. And so I would always say is that like who you're selling to, understand how they buy. And the art of partnerships is really about building incentive alignment. Why would too often I get people going, yeah, partners like what's the purpose of partnering? It's to bring pipeline. Full red herring, nonsense. It's nonsense. It's like, yes, that's one metric. One metric is with source pipeline. And then often we'll say, I want a part of this technology company because they can bring me leads. And well, yeah, but what are they getting? Kickback. Really? Do you think they'll change the behavior of their reps because they're getting 10% of a referral? No. So it's like actually you've got to think more holistically about, well, what's in it for them? And that's what I always say is like, there's different types of partners, there's different motions. And, especially when we were co-selling at Pigment, we did this really well. It wasn't just about, referring business. It was actually, how does it impact our win rates? How does it shorten our sales cycle? How does it, how does it increase our average deal sizes? So we saw increase in average deal sizes, we saw reduced sales cycle lengths, and we saw increase in win rates. Because what happened was these partners were a trusted advisor to their business. So when they were bringing us in, we're working alongside them. They knew that business intimately. They had the domain expertise. They knew how to navigate the procurement, the buyers, and the teams and IT, and they were kind of a trusted sounding board for us. And we had it was just a win-win.
These have said like, customers are our growth engine, but so many customer success teams suck at it. Like they really suck. Part of it is that they're not given the right mandate, but also part of it is that leaders don't take ownership, right? So everything is very short-term focused most of the time. So it's next quarter, next month. That's the extent that most businesses are thinking, which is fine because you're trying to hit your numbers. But it doesn't instill customer growth. To grow a customer, it takes time, it takes trust, it takes effort, it takes value, and often those things aren't aligned. And then the second thing is, CF's leaders are not willing to take ownership for renewals, for expansion. A lot of CS leaders are focused on all the things that are happening to them, not all the things that they have control over, right? Rather than looking for solutions, they're looking for the problems and they're looking to complain about the problems. And that also feeds into thinking that customer success should be a place where it's very clearly defined without any scope creep. And that's just not the reality of working at a startup. And ideally, why you work there is because you get to do things that are outside of your job description. If you really want to have a very narrow job description and only do those things, I can recommend go work in a bank. I have a very strong opinion about this. I really think that the business should be split into two different teams or three, depending on your go-to-market motion. You should have a new business team. You should have an existing business team, and therefore account management should report into CS. And then you should have a channels team, and that channels team should own all channel partnerships as well as expansion retention on those channels. So many teams just don't have the foundations in place, right? They're all running in 100 different directions. Nobody actually sits down and defines what are the processes, what are the things that we want to know and be able to measure and actually make a plan on how to do that, right? The best teams I've worked with are the ones that know what they want to track and how they want to track it and hold people accountable. It works for a couple of reasons. Number one, people don't get burnout if they know what they need to deliver. Secondarily, you can't really make decisions if you don't have good data. You can, but then they gut feel, and that's a challenge. And then lastly, it takes any ownership for it. They're just looking for a RevOps team to join and fix everything. Magic RevOps team that will fix everything.
What's your take on how to choose what to prioritize and, how long to run these little experiments, if you will?
Our first priority was always the customer, understanding your customer, understanding their needs, but also where do they hang out, what they do. seeing what they engaged with help us. Knowledge base is a very prime example of that. Our user base needs and expects very structured training when it comes to using our product. And the best way to actually deliver this and improving product adoption as well was the knowledge base at that time. I'm a firm supporter of having your educational content ungated online rather than sending out PDFs and then losing track of which versions that your customers have. And then it turns out a few years later, it turned out very well. In terms of events, it's the same thing. We were checking, okay, where do our customers hang out? Where do they go? What do they have to do? And for that particular audience, every year, and this is a very technical knowledge about auditors, they need to earn certain CPE credits in order to keep their license. Those CPE credits can be earned through attending these conferences. So once we saw that, okay, let's start going to those conferences, maybe sponsoring a booth, maybe panels that we can kind of host and talk through.
So you guys launch, you have a website now, it's public. Where do you start?
So we started with this thought that we have to make a big splash. We did everything going up to this launch event, which we had scheduled for 2 months into the future. We were like, okay, we're going to launch on this day in March. What do we need to do to get to that point? So the website was done super fast. We had about a month to get all that lined up. And if you talk to most brand agencies and tell them, I have a month, can you work with me? The answer is no, talk to us in 6 months, maybe. So, I mean, that's always fun. But we kind of had to build this whole launch plan culminating in that day. And we had hoped that on that day, we would get a lot of traffic. So I had all the sales pipelines worked out, the forms, everything was checked and double checked and triple checked. Manny has a really good network. So we could get on TechCrunch fairly easily. That wasn't that difficult. But our investors also helped us with PR and all of that. What we did on the launch day is we had a launch party that was scheduled for that evening just to bring in a few of our friends, family, investors, and some prospects, some companies that we were working with, design customers, if you will. You like to think of these events like, okay, you launch, cool, you're done. No, that was just the first step. From that point onwards, you have to like use that forward momentum that you gained and keep that drumbeat going in terms of content and participating in events, and just you have to be on everyone's feed all the time, or wherever if it's a physical or virtual or whatever. So that's kind of how that went. We did get, I don't know, 700, 750 leads on that first 24 hours. And then over time that, that grew, I think it was like 1,500 within a month of incoming leads. And that rolled us for a really, really long time because you can only meet so many people within a day. So we were doing like everyone on the team was doing like 7 or 8 meetings a day. So we were learning a ton while we were going through this.
How are you choosing like which conversations to prioritize and qualifying them in or out?
We started with this kind of lead scoring thing. The truth is it didn't really matter. We pretty much spoke to everyone who looked interesting, or we felt, as if it wasn't obviously a junk email, we would pursue these people. So we would, immediately respond and say, hey, let's find a time. Yeah. A lot of people fall off at that point already, right? And we on purpose put a little bit of friction in this because we wanted to know that this person actually
there's
has
some level of intent.
Exactly. The intent really matters, because if you just let everyone book a meeting with you, you end up with a ton of meetings, right? And then you have no control over it. We on purpose put a little bit of friction so that we could at least pace it and say, okay, well, let's meet next week. Right. And when you're working with people across multiple time zones, it gets really difficult. And our calendars were very, very, very full. We also on purpose limited the length of that first conversation to 25 minutes so that we could have enough time to start up, have that conversation, break down, and then jump into the next one without having everything kind of overlap, because sometimes things do overlap.
In some companies, RevOps does play more of a training coaching role. What was one of the things that worked really well during designing the onboarding program, and what was something that failed completely?
At the beginning, I started to create an onboarding program saying, okay, I'm going to train a new sales rep on the product, how to prospect, our CRM, and so on. But after several months, we discovered that some reps were not good at some elements. And we thought, we don't understand why, because we trained them for that. So we don't understand first, how do we discover a month after their arrival that they are not good at this? And second, we train them. So what happened? And so it really make us think about, okay, there are some skills that we expect from sales reps. We didn't train them on. So how can we expect them to be good? Second, we never assess if they really master the skills. And it's impossible after 2 weeks in a company that you understand everything and you know everything in the company. So we decided to reshape everything. When a sales rep arrived at Pivot, what do we expect from them in terms of hard skill and soft skill? Like, we expect them to master sales nav. We expect them how to use the CRM. We expect them to know what is a tier 1, tier 2 company. We expect them to know the procurement market. So we really list the entire skills that we expect from them. And after we created trainings during the onboarding week to make sure that for every skills that we expect from them, have the proper training. And after the onboarding, you have kind of an assessment. The assessment, it's not like at school. It's really asking questions to make sure that they know and they master the skills. And if they don't master the skills, then we provide extra training on the skills, because it's impossible to remember everything. So by doing this, we have a standard onboarding, but after, we are able to personalize onboarding with extra training and so on. And so really we have seen really great results. And now we have never seen a month after an arrival, a sales rep not mastering a skill.
And that's in the trenches.